Leeds, Leeds, Leeds. What is happening? Welcome to Working Hours, an oral history podcast about a place called Leeds, a time called now, and an activity called work. Working Hours wants to record 1,000 loiners over the course of this, the most important decade in the history of the human species, and ask them about what they do all day and hear how they feel about it. My name is Simon, and this is all my fault. My mission here is to try to map out what my city, Leeds, a city that has declared a climate emergency, did during humanity's biggest emergency. On Working Hours, we hear how loiners have, are, and will be coping with our multiple and expanding crises during their day-to-day working hours. Can we turn things around? We'll find out. To tell this story, I need loiners like you, dear listener. I need people in Leeds or people from Leeds to come on this podcast and just tell me what they do all day and let me record how this affects us. Thank you for listening. What did you want to be when you grew up?
Well, so when I was small, I did really want to be a doctor, but I kind of realised that I probably wasn't going to be very good around gore when I was really quite small. So that didn't last for very long. And then as I got older, when I was a teenager, I never really had a fixed opinion about what I wanted to do or what I wanted to be. So I wasn't a sort of teenager that went, I want to be a lawyer or a specific profession. And my parents really encouraged me always to just do what I really enjoyed. So when I was choosing my A levels, they encouraged me to pick things I enjoyed. When I went to choosing my degree, the same. And so that's always how I've kind of developed my career, is just thinking about the things that I really enjoy, because I have a really strong belief that when you do what you enjoy, you do your best work.
You are listening to Series 5, Episode 28, and to my guest, Eve Roodhouse. This is another Zoom interview recorded on the 10th of May, 2024. Hello, listener. So, housekeeping first, this intro was AI generated. Eve's moved on to a new role since the recording, and we've also had a new government since then. I want to get 10 more recordings in before the end of the year, please. So if you can provide any referrals for any guests for me, please do. Or if you are a loiner who's new to the show and fancy being a guest on this podcast, then drop me a line. Contact details are at the end of the show. Okay, with that out of the way, let's see how good a job AI did of summarizing this discussion. In this episode, Eve Roodhouse shares her journey managing the city's cultural and economic landscape. Discussions range from career transitions, the impact of local government services, and the importance of networking and stakeholder management. The episode explores how Leeds has tackled significant challenges, including COVID-19 and Brexit, and the critical responses implemented to support businesses, manage financial stability, and adapt to new regulations and funding shifts post-Brexit. The importance of major cultural events in economic uplift, community spirit, and the continuous drive for inclusive growth is also highlighted through local examples like the Tour de France Grand Depart or the Yorkshire Sustainability Festival. The conversation emphasises the city's efforts in promoting sustainability and combating climate change through updated growth strategies, green job creation, and infrastructure improvements. The episode also covers the potential impacts of universal basic income on societal and employment landscapes, and spotlights the unique entrepreneurial and collaborative spirit that defines Leeds, making it a special place to work and innovate. Right, let's do this. Episode 138 of Working Hours with Eve Roodhouse. So I'm going to jump straight into what are you doing now then?
So I work for Leeds City Council, and my job title is Chief Officer for Culture and Economy. And you say that fast and it doesn't sound like a lot, but it's quite a big job. So to explain, on the culture side, I look after Leeds museums and galleries. We have 9 sites, 1.3 million objects that we look after for the people of Leeds. And that includes the City Museum, Leeds Art Gallery, Kirkstall Abbey, Temple Newsome, Lollerton Hall, Leeds Industrial Museum, lots of places that people in Leeds will know and love. I also look after arts events and venues, and that includes major events. So putting on events like Leeds Triathlon, the World Series Triathlon, and cultural programmes, which includes the grant making that we do to cultural organisations across the city. Then on the economic development side, provide business support, employment and skills, including supporting some of the people that are most vulnerable and furthest away from the labour market through adult skills provision. We also do destination marketing and international relations. So that's promoting Leeds as a great place to visit, both for tourism, business tourism and leisure tourism, and to invest. So I got to work on attracting Channel 4 to Leeds as part of that. And I've worked with lots of interesting businesses through that. And then economic policy. So I have, since I've been at the council, been responsible for our economic growth strategy, our inclusive growth strategy, and really embedding that into the city and making sure that collectively we're working towards delivering growth that supports everybody in Leeds to thrive. So yeah, that's what I do now.
It's quite a purview. It's like quite wide.
Yeah, but I love that. You know, the reason why I love that is because it's like an intellectual dance, you know, being able to sort of be in a room and alongside, let's say, the Bank of England, you know, and talking to them about their plans for Leeds, or Channel 4 in a different economic context. But then also very much kind of being aware of the services we provide very directly to individuals and to through our employment skills program, and being able to kind of understand how we're really supporting our communities. And that's what keeps it really exciting and interesting.
Yeah, well, I mean, you've got plenty of variety there, haven't you?
That's for sure. Yeah, I think local people don't really appreciate actually just how amazing it is to work in local government, because you do get such variety, but the thing that unifies is the sense of place. So when you work in local government, you're working for a place and you're working for the people and the businesses in that place. And so it just, you know, it's a real honour. I genuinely mean that. It's like a real honour to work for people and businesses and organisations in a particular place, and to come alongside people as they're, you know, at particular times in their lives or in their business development, and to be able to there just to play a small part to support them. It's huge. You know, doing things like doing all the COVID grants, the business grants during COVID, it was a really, really stressful time. But then I look back now and I just think, you know, how great was it to be able to play a part, to be able to do that really, really well, to get that money out the door as quick as we could at the time, to be able to support businesses when they were really struggling and really stressed. So yeah, it's a great thing to be able to work in local government, I'd say.
Okay, so that's a good segue into my next question. So how did you get into it?
Now, I ended up in local government through an interesting path, actually. So a lot of people do work in local government for their whole career. It's not uncommon for people to spend 30, 40 years working in local government. And I've got some fantastic colleagues who have been in local government for a long time. But I actually came into local government through a role that I had in a national organisation. So I started my career working at Deloitte Consulting. So you asked me about my early career and how I made choices about what I did. So when I finished university, I didn't know what I wanted to do. Didn't know what career I wanted. I was lucky enough that where I went to university, we had milk round, you know, so I decided that consultancy might be a good way to go and find out what I wanted to do, because I'd get to try lots of things out.
Yeah.
So I went to work for Deloitte Consulting in London, and when I was working for them, I worked on the introduction of the London congestion charging scheme, which was in 2003. And working really closely alongside the public sector, I realised that what I really wanted to do was work in the public sector directly and to be a public servant. And I think knowing that in my 20s was a real gift, to be able to know and understand I wanted to be a public servant, and to then have the opportunity to move into a role in my early 20s, which was back in Leeds, because I'm from Yorkshire originally, and to come back up north and work on what was then the largest civil IT programme in Europe, the National Programme for IT in the NHS. And that happened because a partner at Deloitte left Deloitte to run the National Programme for IT in the NHS. He was from Huddersfield. He believed that Yorkshire people work really hard, and so he located the National Programme for IT in Leeds.
Mm-hmm.
And so I got to come back up north, got a pay rise, more responsibility, and began a 15-year stage of my career working in the delivery of major IT programmes across the NHS. So I did kind of about 10 years of programme project delivery, and then moved into broader roles in the NHS, broader leadership roles. And how I ended up into the council was because one of the last roles I was doing at what was called NHS Digital at the time, based in Leeds, was a exec director level role, looking after all of the implementation of our systems and the take-up of them across the NHS in England. And as part of that role, I was managing the relationship with Leeds City Council. So I went to meet the famous Tom Reardon, 1 August 2017, and I went to see him to talk about kind of what was going on between NHS Digital and the city and so on. And at the end of the catch up, Tom said, which in a very generous way, which he truly means, and I've heard him say it to many people over the years since, if there's ever anything I can do for you, let me know. So I saw him again in the January. And at the end of the catch up, I said, well, actually, Tom, I'm thinking about my next career move. You must know everybody in Leeds. I don't want a job that's in London. My kids are still young. He didn't miss a beat and said, well, actually, there's a job coming up at the council and you should apply. So that was the Chief Officer for Economic Development at the time. And that was in 2018. So I applied for that job, and that's how I landed in the council, which is not a typical kind of path for someone to go into an economic development role in that way. But the reason why it was a really good match is because in Leeds, we have a really significant health and social care sector. We have a really significant digital sector. And I was able to bring to the role a really good understanding of all of that, but also all my expertise in understanding those sort of connections into the national government, how all those things work, and bringing that perspective into the council. So that's how I ended up where I am, which is why I always say to people, don't be afraid to tell someone that you're looking for a job, because you never know.
Yeah. I mean, it's the best way.
Vocalize it.
Yeah. Well, advertise it. People advertise for recruitment. Advertise when you're searching as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the other thing is, talking openly to people about your ambitions and what you want to do. Sometimes people might come back to you then when they have an opportunity because they know something about you and you think that you might be a good match. So that's certainly something that I always reflect on when I talk to people who are sort of mentoring or coaching, definitely.
Yeah, that's a really good point. So we've done the kind of how you got into it. Before I move into the other questions, I think, what are the... How do I want to phrase it? I mean, I basically want to ask, what are the differences that you kind of see from being in consultancy to being in local government? I mean, I can imagine similarities I would imagine it's very meeting-led work. You're a lot of either online meetings or going to attend meetings with various stakeholders. And with the consultancy, I guess there's a bit more of an audit and response kind of role to that. But then that's a little similar.
Yeah, so my role in local government is maybe a quite interesting one compared to maybe other roles that might exist in local government. So going back to what I was saying earlier, local government is really broad. So you have everything from social care, children's social care, adult social care. You've got highways and transportation. You've got housing. You've got communities. So there's a huge amount of services. The thing that's different about probably my role, where I'm looking after a lot of external relationships, is that I almost have one ear pointing one way and one ear like the other, like in terms of one being very outwards into the city, listening to businesses, listening to our organisations in the cultural sector, and making sure that we're supporting them. but also making sure that they know what our intentions are in terms of the best city ambition and our inclusive growth strategy, and building those relationships and sustaining those relationships so we can work together as one team, and we call ourselves Team Leeds. And that's really, really important. But then the other side of my job is working inside the council, listening to elected members, because we're a political-led organisation, understanding what their direction is and interpreting their putting their sort of policy position into action, because we're there to serve them as officers, and working with colleagues across the council as well on services and so on. So you asked what the difference is between sort of being a consultant and being a public servant in the role that I'm in. I think the mode of consultancy when I did it was obviously you would go and do an assignment, and you'd need to go into that client and you'd need to understand that business really quickly and to be able to do a piece of work for them and have impact. But then you would sort of exit, and you wouldn't necessarily need to navigate loads of internal politics in that organisation, because you're probably there to do a commissioned job or role. So it might be you're doing a strategic review that is being undertaken. You might be playing a role in an IT implementation. You might be delivering in a particular project. I think the fundamental difference about actually being the public servant that is accountable is that you are having to do all that work to kind of navigate all of the ongoing organisational politics and delivery, and making sure you're delivering, whilst also managing all those external relationships. I think the skills that I developed during consultancy and throughout the time I did project and programme delivery are skills that are so useful, though, in my role in local government, because the things that I was taught as a graduate by Deloitte Consulting, and then have honed over the first sort of 5-10 years of my career, to be able to go on to a project, to be able to assess really quickly, like, what's going on. So, what's happening here? Who are the stakeholders? What's the risk? How do we plan? What do we deliver? All of those skills are so helpful when you then get into a more broader leadership role and you have to take on new bits of work or to be able to lead teams, because you need to be able to assess what's happening in the operating environment at a strategic level, an operational level, all the relationships. So those things that I learned in my early part of my career, whilst I'm doing it in a very different context now, they're still really relevant. And a lot of the things I was really taught as a graduate in consultancy, I still use. They taught, I know it sounds really funny, but they taught us things like how to write a really good email, so that people would read it. And I still use
because
that
people don't
now.
read emails. Yeah. I mean,
Yeah,
that is good.
And just to be clear, the advice I was given was tell them what you want in the first paragraph, put the detail in the middle, and tell them what you want again at the end. So just if anyone wants that advice, that works.
Yeah, that's spot on, I think.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
We'll talk about COVID. We'll do that, get that out of the way. So I'm looking at two main areas in this. So initially, going into the lockdown, I'm asking people, did your work increase massively? So there seems to be three reactions. It didn't change, so you worked as normal. Your work fell off a cliff and you had nothing to do, or you had all the work in the world and I'm imagining that was you as well. Yeah. And then coming out of COVID, what are the kind of differences that you've noticed in the ways that you work?
Yeah, sure. So, the pandemic, it feels a lifetime ago and yet yesterday, doesn't it? It's really, it's really interesting. So for me, obviously, working in the public sector during the pandemic, my workload was really significant. It was also really interesting being in the role that I was during the pandemic, because what I was able to see was how the pandemic was affecting all the different business sectors across the city. And I don't think there'll ever be another time in history where we saw the sort of same sets of things being done by different organisations, different sectors at the same time. So it was really interesting, because what I observed was the first thing that everybody did was, can we get our people safe? So everyone was focused on, can we get all our staff working from home? Is everybody safe? And so, from the point of view of leadership, I can remember very clearly saying to one of my team, you can't, this was the week before lockdown, you can't go to that client meeting face to face. You really mustn't go, because there's a risk that you might be spreading COVID-19. And I remember one of my team looking at me going, well, why can't we go? And the penny just hadn't dropped. And so that for me was one of the kind of the first things, was about that leadership thing of, let's get our people safe, let's make sure they understand how serious this is, but let's facilitate them being able to work from home, and let's look after them. I think the next wave that we saw everybody being concerned about was finance. So, what is happening to our bottom line and how we're going to deal with the financial side of things. Now, obviously, as a council, that hit us as well. Although I wasn't directly involved in that personally, but councils now are reliant on a lot of external income, whether that's from things like car parks, which weren't being used. We had to close museums, we had to close our leisure centres. That's really difficult stuff to do, and to figure out how you're going to manage those finances. From the role that I was doing in the council, what I started to get was the real sense of angst and concern from businesses about what was going to happen in advance of the government bringing forward policies. And we saw it happening, obviously, first with like conferencing, because we do a lot of work with hospitality and conferencing. So before the formal lockdown began, businesses, large businesses, were cancelling conferences. Because this was a global thing, and there were businesses like KPMG, for example, were cancelling conferences before the physical.
Because they already knew, they've got an operation in so and so that's like, right, we've had to do this. This is what we've done. Here's what you will need to do. Yeah, exactly.
And so we knew already that businesses were starting to get worried and concerned, because we were seeing that happen. And so we were seeing that decline begin with the different sectors we work with, primarily hospitality to begin with. And, it was really hard, because, we had people really concerned with us. And then the next phase for us was obviously playing our part in providing business support. So how, that was really difficult, because what happened was, inevitably, the Prime Minister at the time, Boris Johnson, or the Chancellor, Rishi Sunak, stood up, usually on a Friday, usually at 5 o'clock. And it was always at 4 or 5 o'clock.
And you're expected to know what it means on Monday, 9 a.m. So you have to work all weekend.
Well, it wasn't even that, though, because they would give the high level and say, this is what the scheme's going to be. But they hadn't written the detail. So we had no
And I bet
detail.
you hadn't got briefed at the same time or anything. It was just they said something, and then all the civil servants had to go, what does this mean?
Exactly that. So the first time that happened, of course, everyone starts emailing us, well, when do we get the money? And it's like, well, we don't even know what the blooming policy is yet and how we're going to get it out to you. So, it was a real, what had to happen inside is, I had to do things like, I need some help as quick as I possibly can get it from the digital team, to develop an online form for businesses to be able to apply for their grant applications. And we need to design that quickly. But before we even got to that, it's like, what's the policy? Who's going to be eligible for these grants? How are we going to administer them? How are we going to put the team together for this? Who's going to work on it? So it was doing all of that from home. You can imagine, kind of assembling a team to be able to do that quickly, and then getting
between answering all the emails that are like, what's happening? What's going on?
Well, and having a husband that was working full time in the NHS on COVID-19 response, and 2 children at home who was trying to, study. So that to me, like, COVID, the lockdown felt, if I look back, on a personal note, I think both me and my husband felt a huge sense of purpose, because we had such important roles to deliver, and it was a really positive thing to know that you were having that impact. But
exhausting though.
Well, quite. And the other side of it as well is that businesses didn't have anywhere on else to talk to. You can't phone up the Chancellor and have a moan at him that you haven't got any business support. You can get access to your council. So, I do remember taking a call from a business owner based in Leeds, who, spent 10, 15 minutes telling me how angry they were that they weren't getting any business support. And to be honest, I just listened to them and took it, because who else were they going to talk to? And I wasn't in a position to solve their problem. But I think my reflection was, maybe that person felt better because they were actually able to talk to someone, even if I couldn't do something for them.
You've
But
got to express it, haven't you?
that's right.
That's part of the process. It's like, I've got to get the anger out, and then we can discuss.
Yeah, but we got better. You'll remember, or you might not remember, there was lots of waves of business support. So after the first once we'd understood how this worked, actually we got much better at it. So we had the team in place, we had the support from IT, we had the support from comms, and so we'd know that we'd get the announcement, then some guidance, and then so we would put communications out as soon as possible, saying, this is where you'll be able to find the information. We'll to let you know as soon as it's open, etc. So we got really good at it. And I know it sounds really funny, but one of the things that I'm really proud of is that there were certain business support that, corporations that had organisations in multiple places could only claim in one place. And a lot of businesses chose to claim in Leeds because we processed everything so quickly. So that to me was a real compliment, that we were getting the money out the door and doing the work to support businesses. We were doing it in a way where we were checking, we weren't being irresponsible, but it was being done quickly. So that was, it was a kind of odd time. But the last bit to sort of say, because you remember I talked about people, I talked about finance. The third wave that we saw was strategy. So it was really interesting as well in my role, because you started to see businesses they all went into that third phase of going, so what's our strategy? How are we going to use this time to rethink our strategy? And I mentioned that just because the businesses that we saw change their strategy then are the ones that are really thriving now, really interestingly. So I think about, for example, one of the organisations in Leeds that I remember talking to their chief exec at the time, head of partnership. She did she was very clear about what she needed to do strategically and made some big decisions. But then off the back of that, now they're really thriving as an organisation. So those organisations that kind of did that really good thinking and changed their model or made the tough decisions then, you could see that those organisations are the ones that are really thriving again now. So it's very interesting. And I think the final thing to say as well is that the people that were the first in were also the last out of the implications. So those conferencing businesses and hospitality businesses were the ones that were the last out of having the implications of COVID, in March 2022, really. And it's those businesses that are still carrying a lot of debt and risk. So I hope, hopefully we'll continue to see some recovery for them in the next period of time.
I mean, it is really exceptional of just like power everything down and then power it all up again. I mean, so I was working in working in travel in 21, and the whole industry was just like, we don't know what's going on, because they had to go back from 0 to 100, and it just wasn't working. It's like, how do you do that? Let's move on let's do Brexit, because that came sort of straight after, and then the questions will get a bit brighter as we go. Brexit, did that affect anything for you? Has that changed the way that you worked? Has it changed the kind of things that you're dealing with?
So obviously, in the role that I do at the council, obviously leading on economy, yes, of course, because we've it's impacted it in a few ways. So in terms of the kind of service delivery, it's impacted us because a lot of the services that we deliver used to be funded through European funding. So there was lots of different schemes like the European Structural Investment Fund that funded activity that was providing capital investment and revenue investment into programs like business support and employment and skills. So one of the really obvious ways it's affected us is that we've transitioned away from European funding towards a reliance on new funding sources, which include the UK Shared Prosperity Fund, which is the government's UK scheme that's there to kind of replace European funding and funding programmes, at least on the revenue side, and gain share, which is gain share is the money that the West Yorkshire Combined Authority secured as part of the devolution deal. So that was a big thing for us operationally, in terms of making sure we secured that funding to be able to continue to do that work, to support businesses and to deliver our employment and skills services. But then the other thing, obviously, is in providing business support, in assessing the economy in Leeds, we've also been tracking and understanding what the EU exit has meant for businesses. There are still things that are working through. So everything from, if you think about music artists wanting to go and tour abroad, and cultural institutions. So we have got some amazing cultural institutions in Leeds, like Northern Ballet and Opera North and others, and they do tour. But if you want to go and tour in Europe now, it costs a lot more. There's a lot more paperwork associated with it. It's much harder to do. And of course, the same in terms, we've got quite a big manufacturing base in Leeds. And, initially there's quite a lot of kind of puzzling and working out what it all meant from a manufacturing point of view in terms of supply chain and so on. And I think it was compounded because what you saw was the impacts of the pandemic on the supply chain and leaving the EU kind of at the same time. So kind of both impacting the economy. And interestingly, I was listening to the economist from the Bank of England chief economist a couple of weeks ago. And he was talking about how that actually lasted for a few years, and that was part of what was causing some of the issues with inflation. But the supply chain has stabilised now post-COVID, and some of that landscape has settled a little bit. EU exit hasn't completely changed my role, but it obviously has impacted us in terms of getting that funding right for the future. Some of which brought us opportunities because there's a bit more creativity, plus there's pros and cons as ever, like some things that are more flexible, some things that are not. But overall, I kind of would say it's just something we're still keeping an eye on, really, because we need to just keep seeing how we can navigate and support businesses in that landscape of the new legislation that's in place, really.
It's one of those areas that, the questions that are formulated have come out of the discussions that I had early on in these interviews. But with Brexit, I think the conversation around it is kind of terrible, and because it goes into all sorts of other areas. But I think it's good to look at it through the kind of work lens and then go to people directly and sort of say, well, what's the actual effect? And you're kind of seeing that. But I get the impression that it's kind of another thing. It's like another thing on your list of things that you look after and have to deal with. So it's not really like, it's not a major change for you. It's just changes the things that you work on. Do you see what I mean?
I think that's right. I think so I think that's a fair assessment in my case, in my role. That it's just I think it's interesting. It's interesting because we, before the pandemic came along, we were actually all going, "Oh, EU exit. What's that going to mean? What's that going to mean?" Then the pandemic came along, and you're like, "Oh, well, EU exit. Well, fine. What's happening?
How do we deal with this?
Here's a pandemic." So I think the two things together, in a way, meant that actually it just became, as you say, something else you were dealing with, rather than the thing that we were concerned with through the economic strategy and development lens.
And then we had Ukraine, and then we started into a whole other set of problems.
Exactly. And I think it's really interesting because you think about how the economy has kind of fared through that. I think what we're most keenly focused on at the moment is actually the level of inactivity in the workforce, to be honest. So because the pandemic led to a lot of people choosing not to work anymore. Like, there were people who retired, but there's also been an increase in people who are unwell and not able to work. At the same time, obviously, EU exit has meant that the rules are different about people coming into the UK to work. And so in certain parts of the economy, there's a real shortage of skills. So, that the most fascinating thing is that now and for the next decade, you've got all these influences on the economy in terms of the effect of digital, which is just going to grow because, more as we adopt AI more, there's going to be different jobs, different needs. The effect of the need to transition to a net zero economy, that's going to mean new jobs, different jobs, new skills. And, at the moment, we can't quite keep up with the skills that we need as a workforce to be able to deliver. And there's a few things we've really got to try and crack. We've got to try and crack how we support people of all ages to be able to keep their skills up to date and to value everybody of every age, to be able to keep them skilled, to be able to stay in the workforce, right? So, we can't afford for people to get to their 50s and think, oh, I'm tired, I don't want to, I don't want to be in the workforce anymore because I don't want to be like kind of learning this next bit of technology or having to do X or having to do Y. And we can't afford for employers to think that people over a certain age can't do,
or
can't
equally that they'll all
contribute.
just pay for courses endlessly as well, because
Yeah.
you need them. If you're constantly training, that's an expense that you're going to have to take on. Now, is that part of your wage, or is that part of your consumer expenditure, or is that going to be picked up by government or by industry or whatever? So yeah, it's like a whole massive area.
So there's some interesting work we're doing at the moment in the council where we started doing some work together between my academic development team and the health team, and we started to look at work and health, and we've been started by looking at the data, and then we've been developing like customer personas to start to try and understand how people engage with us, and to think about how we might just do even better around supporting those people, to make sure that we can keep people in work and we can get people back into work. So I think it's going to be, I think, an obsession, I would say, for economists and for people that work in this space for a good 5 years or more, just figuring out how we kind of keep supporting people into work. And sadly, part of the issue is an increase in mental health issues for younger people. And that, I don't think there's yet research about how that relates to the pandemic. Or another
or social media
or social media. Yeah, yeah. So, but that's something we're going to have to unpick as well, because we need to work through some of that. So yeah, I mean, that doesn't depress me, like, all of that. You see, all these things I find really interesting, and because I know that actually if me and my team and the departments, we can make a difference. So I don't feel
because you get to
by
work the problem.
Exactly.
It's not something abstract that's happening over there that things are happening over here that's dramatic, and it's on my radar, but I'm not involved, so I don't. So I worry about it.
Yeah, so it's interesting, you see, right? Because in local government, there's some things you can't change, like inevitably, because certain government policy you can't change. But there's a huge amount you can, and there's a huge amount you can do through partnerships. And that's one of the really powerful things that exists in Leeds, is just the depth and strength of partnerships across the city. So, for example, on an employment and skills, we have some fantastic partnerships. With our further education establishment in Leeds, with Leeds City College, who are amazing, and the Illuminate Group and Leeds College of Building, and then with our higher education providers. So it's building on those so that you can kind of, because everyone's got this, the thing is, right, everyone's facing into the same issues. So if you work together on them, you're going to be able to kind of solve them more effectively together.
I may as well go into climate change, then we'll come to social media at the end.
Yeah.
So we're tackling the big things, so let's tackle the biggest. For your work, I mean, you work in the council. The council has declared a climate emergency. So, I mean, it's got to be part of your working. It's something that's in there in the mix already. But for yourself, how much does it kind of affect things? Like, have you felt any impacts? Like, is it something that you want to, like, is it a part of your work that you want to focus on? Yeah.
Yeah, so yeah, the council declared a climate emergency in 2019. So I'd been in the council for about a year at that point, and Leeds has always been quite pioneering in addressing climate change before that. So we were the first city to have a climate commission, for example. But I think declaring a climate emergency meant that it became much more fundamental in council business that we think about the climate emergency in our policy and decision making. So in any paper that we have to write for big decisions that go to the council's executive board or other forums, we have to explicitly say how our decision is impacting on the kind of climate, and alongside also inclusive growth and health and well-being, which are the council's other two big priorities. So there was a fundamental cultural thing of there was work going on anyway, but suddenly it became really embedded in everything. So I think that was a real a really positive thing. That's the case. I think so. You asked me sort of two questions. I suppose reflecting on it personally first, and then a bit more with the professional hat on. I think it's something I think about a huge amount. I have two teenagers, and one of them said to me not long ago when we were just on a walk, we were talking about, I don't know why, but we were talking about kind of how long my mum might live. My bearing in mind, my gran lived till she was 104. So we're talking about my mum, and we were saying how, she'll go on forever. She's full of energy. She'll go well on to she's 100 and whatever. And my son just said something really shocking. He said, well, I won't live that long because I'll be dead because of climate change.
Yeah.
And I was really taken aback. I kind of thought, crikey, imagine being a teenager now and actually verbalizing that thought that you will not live as long as your grandparent because of the impacts of climate change. I mean, that is just unbelievable that our kids think that, and quite sad. And so I think it's a generational response. I mean, I say generational, if it's for all our responsibilities, those are in leadership roles, to think about how we can have an influence on some of this. So going back to wearing the professional hat, I think this year we refreshed our inclusive growth strategy, and we did really think about how that was going to reflect the work that we're doing on climate resilience and addressing the climate emergency in a way that hadn't really been as present in the inclusive growth strategy in 2018. I don't think there was many references at all to it in 2018. So we really baked it in throughout the whole strategy, because we know that a certain amount of warming is going to unfortunately be irreversible. So as a city, we're going to have to focus both on continuing our work on climate resilience. We've done loads of work on flood alleviation over the last few years since the dreadful floods in 2015, but we're also going to have to start thinking about how we're going to be resilient to heat waves and and all of that. And but the work that we're going to be doing on transport as well is quite fundamental to be able to shift people out of the car and to be able to, do more active travel, cycle more, hopefully. People that might be listeners feel they're benefiting from some of the work we've been doing over several years now to really get the cycling infrastructure improved across the city. But, we've got a decade or more work to do now on a mass transit solution, a tram for Leeds. Finally, it's going to happen. But that work is going to be really, really important. And the role that my team will play in some of that is making the case for it in terms of not just, have a tram, but, how is that going to support people to be able to, to access jobs, to all of that kind of thing. And then the other way it influences our work as well is that, trying, obviously I've got skills and business support in both space. So from a skills perspective, trying to get on the front foot around working with our FE colleges and our higher education institutions to make sure that the training's going to be there for the jobs that are emerging, and trying to get that alignment with employers. And mass transit will be a great opportunity for this, actually, to make sure that parents, for example, can see the demand in the new jobs, so that when their kids say, I want to become, you know, a heat pump engineer, they kind of go, oh, is there going to be a job there? Yes, there absolutely will. So there's all of that type of work. And then, so yeah, then of course there's the business support side. And on the business support side, you know, the vast majority of our economy is made up of small, medium enterprises, or SMEs. And those businesses are going to need loads of kind of support to think about how they're going to move to net zero and pivot and build up the skills they need. And we're providing some of that support now through the combined authority and working with them. But I think the scale of that is only going to increase over the next period of time. And, you know, I think that we need to lean into that and think about that as an opportunity, right? So actually, again, strong business leaders and entrepreneurs ought to be like looking into the future going, right, where's the demand going to come? What do we, you know, where do we think that this is, you know, the future is? And yeah, so I think to sum up, it's, you know, I think on climate change, there is the risk that you can fall into the kind of, you know, we're going to be living in, I think I was listening to the radio in the morning, we're going to be in this dystopian hell within 20 years. It's all going to be a disaster.
We already are.
I think, but I think if you fall into that trap and you think that you can't do anything, then you become powerless. And the reality is that we can all do something, and you know, we can make a difference in our work. We can make a difference in our personal lives, and so that's we need to do that wherever we can.
I want to add to what you've said, just anecdotally, just sort of, you know, feedback from doing this. I mean, when I've talked to sustainable businesses or businesses that have a kind of green element to them, and I'm like, because you can easily get the idea that, you know, it's very out of favor and it's sort of, you know, it's not butch enough. So, but there is a lot of demand, and like there seems to be a lot of demand out there for a lot of solutions and a lot of other things, and work, and like green jobs. Like there are a lot of people who wanted work in and out, you know, people that have started these businesses a lot of the time because they've had to start them because it's just like there aren't any clean jobs, you know.
Yeah, it's great. I mean, yeah, I agree. I mean, the from what I know, you know, this is what I said to my elder son, you know, like, what do you want to do? And I said, if I were you, I'd become an expert in sustainability, because do you know that people are getting, it's a bit like when digital first like became a big thing, that young people were sort of getting over promoted because there weren't enough people with those skills. It's sustainability. That's kind of what's happening at the moment, because some organizations are talking about the fact that they're worried that quite young people are getting into quite senior roles and they don't have the management skills. They've got the sustainability knowledge, but not the management skills. So sustainability specialists are really, really important. But a bit like digital, right? I think it's not going to be enough to just have sustainability specialists. All of us are going to have to upskill and understand what we need to do. So it's back to what I was saying earlier in the podcast about digital skills and learning for life and all of that type of stuff. We've got to keep on the front foot and understand and take responsibility, particularly for in leadership roles, about understanding all those things. The other thing, I would just give a shout out as well to Kate Hutchinson and the Yorkshire Sustainability Festival. Kate established that last year and she's doing it again in June this year. And it's a great way to show how business is really embracing the challenge of climate change, because there has historically been a little bit of business is bad and like not, you know, but actually, as you said, there's loads of entrepreneurs and businesses that really want to, even if they haven't got a business that's focused into sustainability, they want to make their business sustainable. So it's great that we've got that happening in Leeds, where we can kind of bring together business around the theme and really kind of lean into it, definitely.
Yeah. I mean, I'm really lucky that I am doing this in Leeds. Like I wanted to map a kind of I knew there would be changes over this decade, but I didn't expect COVID, but nobody did. So yeah, I want to map that change, and I think I'm really lucky with Leeds. We've got the sustainability school, we've got all these green businesses that have started. We've declared a climate emergency. I think we're very well placed in terms of all of that kind of work. So yeah. I will move us on to social media. So what I'm looking at here, I mean, I don't know how much you'll have to actually do in your role, but I would imagine that, if you have to do any, it's like a whole team that is working in various bits. But my question is, how much time do you need to spend on it? And do you feel that that time spent on social media is valuable, that it gives the return on investment that you want?
So yeah, social media is a big part of our lives now, isn't it? And, I do spend time on social media for work purposes. I do, before X, formerly Twitter, sort of dropped off a cliff a bit, I used to spend a lot of time on what was Twitter, kind of both sharing what I was doing, but kind of staying in touch with, in some ways, what the drumbeat of the city was. It was a great way, actually, just to find out what people were doing and what was going on and how people were feeling, but also sharing what we were doing. But when it did drop off a cliff, I kind of realised that maybe I was spending a bit too much time on there. And it was kind of a helpful way of kind of going, actually, you don't need to be on there quite so much.
Yeah.
And I have subsequently spent a bit more time on LinkedIn, but nowhere near as much time as I used to spend on Twitter/X, because I find LinkedIn is actually a bit more helpful, because you can just look at it maybe a couple of times a week and pick up some interesting things that are going on and stay in touch. And you can actually also put posts up from time to time to share what you're doing, so people know about your pieces of work and can engage with them. So I do spend quite a lot of LinkedIn. I've made a very deliberate decision not to get onto Instagram. Interestingly, people still message me stuff from Instagram when they think I should see it. So I'm obviously not missing out, because they go, "Oh, have you seen this post on Instagram?" I'll be like, "Oh, okay." And my comms team will tell me if there's something I need to see as well. So I think social media is a great tool for being able to kind of hear and understand and, get the feel for something. But it can become really consuming if you're not careful.
Has it replaced the phone at all for you? Like, I would imagine, especially when you were working at Deloitte and so on, a lot of the work would be very phone based, ringing clients and seeing where they are and phone appointments and things like that.
Yeah, it's quite well, when I started work, I'm not that old, but when I started,
so much has changed though.
when I started work, you used to leave like voicemails. So like you'd have a landline number, and if someone didn't answer, then you'd leave them a voicemail, which is supposed to be a bit like a voice note that you would leave on WhatsApp. Now you were just leaving it in this, remote place that was attached to a landline. You had to dial in to pick it up rather than just press play on your mobile phone. So it's not that different in that respect. So I think, has social media replaced phone for me? I'm not sure, I think what it has done, which I think is really helpful, is that perhaps someone you haven't been in touch with for a long time, like say maybe 4 years or something, they can get in touch with you on LinkedIn and they can send you a little message and say, "Oh, I saw your post, I just wanted to get in touch with you about this, I'm doing that, could we have a chat?" Or people who can connect with you that you don't have your phone number. And then I usually then say to someone, "Oh, can you send me an email?" Because if it's a message in LinkedIn, I then struggle to like necessarily action it. But it is a great way to be able to make sure that somebody can reconnect with you. And I think that, if I think I am a Zennial, so I am in that generation that had a analog childhood and a digital adulthood, where I had that transition into my digital adulthood. And so, it's if I think about my childhood, you had to write letters to people and pick up the landline. You would lose contact with people really easily in that landscape. But with social media, I see it as a positive. Might not always be a positive, but you can.
Yeah, I was going to say some of that was good though.
Yeah,
sometimes it was good that people left.
Yeah. When Facebook first came out, there was a few interesting things that happened. What was the name of that social media thing that was one of those early ones? Friends Reunited. Didn't that cause you loads of breakups? Wasn't there something about like people
It
got back
wouldn't
together?
surprise, yeah, like
I think
childhood
there was,
sweethearts and stuff. Yeah.
yes. When Friends Reunited first came out, I'm sure there was like people who got back together who'd been met at school and ended up getting divorced from their partners. Yeah, not great.
Yes, the unexpected consequences.
Yeah.
Oh, we've done all the main 4 questions. Okay, we're doing a decent time. We're not going too fast. So the change question: if you could change any 3 things about your work, what would you change?
Oh, crikey. Right. So if I could change any 3 things about my work, what would I change? Well, it'd probably be a bit remiss of me. I need to be honest and say, it is quite hard in local government at the moment because the financial situation is really challenging. So I think the first thing would just to sort of say the financial pressure to ease a bit on local government so that so that the situation was a bit easier in terms of being able to operate. That's not to say that we shouldn't keep reforming local government and making local government better, and that you shouldn't always be looking at how you change the places that you run and the services that you deliver. I definitely am not one for standing still. It's just widely documented really about the financial challenges that are faced. And when I came into the council from the NHS, I was quite staggered actually about how challenging it was financially then compared to the NHS. And that was nearly 6 years ago. And, it's just continued in local government. So I think that would be probably one of the things that I'd prioritise would be that. And then what else? Oh gosh. So 3 things. Oh my goodness.
You don't have to use them all, but I mean you can. So it's up to you. I'm not trying to pressure you.
Yeah, I think I'd like. I see so much potential in our places. The UK is one of the countries with the least devolution compared to other countries in Europe. So if you look at it's like Germany, for example, there's so much like kind of local control over decision making and more in a local gift. I think again, more confidence in places to be able to kind of make decisions for themselves and in a framework of trust, really. There's so many fabulous people that work in Leeds. It's just a great place to be. I think of the people I've done work with over the last 6 years from from the University of Leeds, from the private sector, from the culture side of things. There's so many creative people, so many great businesses. And we often know what we really need to do as a city. And I think there's something for me about how you empower places to really play their part in the UK as a whole, and how we can enable more of that. I mean, I think we're on the journey with the devolution and having a West Yorkshire mayor and that sort of being a model in the UK, but I think we need to make it work as best we can to be able to do more of that and to kind of move things forward. So that I think that's going to be quite important into the future. I'm not sure I've got a third thing. Third thing? Is there a third thing?
Is there a big event that you'd really like to have, or like?
So I would, yeah. Well, I mean,
Taylor Swift in the town hall or something.
Taylor Swift in the town hall, not quite. But I have got a little mini project on at the moment, which is which I probably can't say too much about.
I was going to say, can you talk about it?
But yeah, I mean, I would really kind of love to get Leeds to the sort of stage that Liverpool's at. So Liverpool's really interesting because they had European Capital of Culture in 2008, and that has kind of created this legacy that's gone on and on and on, where they have just this huge acceptance and belief in culture and major events and the power of culture and major events. And you can see that in the way they hosted Eurovision last year, which was phenomenal. Not that I'm gutted or anything, because I did lead our bid for Eurovision, but anyway, that's a whole different podcast. But I think I would love for us to have that kind of rhythm of like saying every 3-5 years we want to have a really mega scale event, and we're really behind it. And you know, to be able to kind of have the buzz of, you know, when we had the Tour de France Grand Depart, and it was kind of like just absolutely amazing. It was actually before I worked in the council, but it was, I think it was like our Olympics, wasn't it? When we had the Tour de France Grand Depart, it was like, it was just brilliant. You know, and I think I can remember coming into Leeds station on the Monday after the Tour de France Grand Depart. And it was almost like everyone had this sort of happy hangover. Like everyone had these massive smiles on their faces, and everyone had like stories about where they'd been and what they'd seen. And it touched every. Do you know that that's the occasion?
Were you in London for the Olympics?
I did go to. I didn't live there, no, but I did go down there. My husband actually worked on the Olympics, you know. So I went.
I was massively cynical about it because it's Britain, and it was like, oh, it'll be rubbish. We won't be able to do this, and it'll all be a mess, and like it's going to be a nightmare. But my God, was it like generally really well organized? Like it hardly even, you know, like there wasn't more people in the city. You didn't feel it in a good way, like. But also everyone was kind of. Well, not everyone. It's London, but there was a buzz, you know.
Yeah, there was.
So, and I think you're right. It was similar with Grand Depart here.
Do you know what I was just reflecting on, thinking about our discussion today, was one of the things that I really believe is that major events, culture, kind of bringing people together, it's so fundamental, and it's so important as we go into the next decade, because we're facing so many big challenges, you know, whether it's climate change, whether it's, you know, the issues in the economy, and kind of the stuff we were talking on about labour market and health and so on. But what, you know, what culture can do, what major events can do, is they can bring people together from all sorts of backgrounds and walks of life, and create experiences where you can build understanding, and you can have shared memories, as we've just been sharing now, that you never forget. And they connect you to a place, and they connect you to a time, and they help you make sense of things, and they create, you know, really important experiences. And sometimes it's quite hard to put like a tangible value on that beyond the immediate economic uplift of hospitality, etc. So I suppose, I suppose that, you know, you hit on something really about saying, you know, that kind of context of knowing and having the confidence as a city that those things are just as important to us as getting the tram system, the mass transit system in. And hopefully Leeds United will perform in the playoffs and get back into the Premier League, since we're talking in May 2024 and we're about to embark on that journey again.
I will stay quiet on this because I know nothing of football. So
no, well, I don't really either, but because I lead on economic development, right? What I do know is that having a team in the Premier League makes a very big difference to the city.
I mean, I can imagine that. What was I going to say? Oh yeah, just on the placemaking thing. I mean, you know, we didn't just move into cities to work in factories. You know, if you think back in the archaeological record. So, I mean, the first sites that we're finding are like temples, are places where people come together to do a thing, you know. And I think that's always, that's what we do. I mean, whether it is football, you know, a football game or a concert or a play or whatever it is, it's like, but it's as much coming together and the getting home afterwards as well, because that's a large part of going to any event, isn't it? Of like the logistics of how easily will I get out of here when there's several 100,000 other people?
There was yesterday, you were talking on a day when yesterday there was a train strike and I was going to an event in the evening. So what part of the conversation was, how did you get here? You know, like, how did you get here? 36 bus, or like, oh, I got a taxi from Manchester. Someone got a taxi from Manchester. But he said that there was 4 of them. So by the time they'd split it, it was the same as 4 train tickets. So it was quite interesting, really. But yeah, it's always a topic of conversation in Leeds, isn't it? Transport will be for the next 20 years.
yeah. traffic, gridlock, buses, yeah, all of it. Yeah,
Yeah.
very true. So, final question is the UBI question. If there was a universal basic income, how do you think it might change your work?
Do you know, it's a question I haven't thought about a lot, but it
I mean, I
could.
guess you wouldn't be administering it. I don't
No,
think, because it'd be
no, it possibly could be. I'd imagine something like that might be administered
like
by
Bank of
DWP
England.
or with or the Department of Work and Pensions, possibly. I mean, I think how it might change things might be how we're interacting with employment, our employment and skills provision, and how it might impact businesses. But I have to be honest and say I've not actually read a huge amount about universal basic income, and so it's not something I've formed big opinions on.
That's a solid answer. I'm happy with that. I mean, it's fine to say you don't know, isn't it? Like, if you don't know, you don't know. And it is a weird one. Like, I really enjoy talking about this because not many people, you don't hear much about it, and not many people talk about it. So there are, sort of set kind of responses to dismiss it, which then I quite like getting towards other criticisms of people saying other things that are kind of like, oh, I hadn't thought of that. But I think it's just an interesting thought experiment as well, of like, because it's one of those where other things add on. Because a lot of the time people will say, oh, it'd encourage more businesses to start and stuff. There's the potential health benefits of like people being available more and not having to work as much and all these kind of things. So yeah, and I think it's one of those things that if it did come to be, we can't imagine how that would change things. The only way to know is to find out.
Yeah, and I suppose in my context, it would be, in the context that I work in, it would be a result of a political decision that's what was going to happen. So I think that level is obviously would have to come from a national government, and it's not something I've seen being brought forward by any of the main political parties as yet in their policy positioning. But I know there are European countries where it's in place. I can't remember where. You sound like you've done some research on it, so you must know.
Well, there were 2 trials that they were doing in the UK. I mean, I've disengaged from news and stuff now because it just it's too much for me. But yeah, I need to check back in on the various UBI trials and stuff. There is a special coming up, which should be out before your interview, actually. But I did speak to someone from one of the UBI labs we've got this thing in Leeds, UBI labs, which is a little campaign to promote universal basic income, and talked to one of the people there, very interesting guy. So we did a whole sort of interview just on UBI and around that. So that's coming up. Yeah, I think that's all my questions. So we mentioned social media. I mean, obviously these are kind of work shares and so on. So if you want to share anything, feel free. Where can people find you, or where can people find the relevant council departments and things, like anything that you want to plug, basically?
Yeah, of course. So if anyone wants to know more about our work at Leeds City Council, we've got a brilliant website where you can find out all about our inclusive growth strategy and all the work that we're doing to kind of deliver our future talent plan, which is supporting employment and skills. You can also see on there some of the kind of innovative work we're doing with something called the Social Progress Index, which is about trying to measure what we're doing to deliver inclusive growth. So please do take a look at all of that. And if you want to kind of just know a little bit more about my work individually, I'm on LinkedIn, so feel free to follow me on LinkedIn or connect, and you'll see a little bit more of a flavour of some of what I get up to there.
Excellent. So I also offer my guests an opportunity to talk about anything they might want to talk about that we haven't touched on, since I've just made you sit there and talk about things I want to talk about for an hour. So yeah, is there anything that we haven't covered that you'd like to flag or mention? Or
I think I've said it a little bit in the discussion that we've had, but I just want to underline what a special place Leeds is to work, and how lucky we are to have a lot of people that could have gone to work anywhere but have stayed in Leeds. And that's across a lot of different sectors, whether that's culture, the public sector, the private sector, entrepreneurs who've started businesses here and often had people say, why don't you move to London? and they've said, no, I want to stay here.
Mm.
And I think there's an increasing confidence and belief that we can do stuff from Leeds, that we can change the world from Leeds.
We already have.
Yeah, absolutely. We already have, and we can do more. And so I think that's really special. And I suppose I'd just love to see us keep supporting one another in that way, and that really sort of proper Yorkshire/Leeds way of getting on and making stuff happen, but increasingly telling everybody about it too.
Yeah. Leeds, Leeds.
Yeah, something like that. Yeah.
Okay.
So two non-football experts. Yeah.
Yeah, but we both like Leeds, you know,
Yeah,
the concept and the place.
Yeah.
So the place being more important than the concept.
Yeah.
So so thank you very much for today and for
You're
spending your
welcome.
time with me on this.
Yeah, it's been very enjoyable.
Balmy afternoon. Good. That should be the aim. That should be the result.
Thank you again to Eve for being my guest. Thanks as always to all my guests, and thanks to you, Leeds, for being my subject. You can find Eve on LinkedIn at linkedin.com, and obviously Leeds City Council has a massive website that's very easy to find. If you'd like to contact me about working hours or any of my guests or their interviews or what the hell I'm on about at any particular moment or anything at all working hours related, even being a guest yourself, yes, you can do that if you are a lawyer, then email me your brain noises about my show at workinghoursPod@western-studios.com. If you would like to buy Working Hours episodes outside of this main project, either as gift episodes for yourself or for others, then you can do that. And you don't need to be a lawyer to do that either. If you've been a guest on Working Hours already and you'd like to buy additional clips or content from your Working Hours episode or interview, then I'm obviously very happy to let you do that. If you want to license Working Hours for anything, or if you really want some Working Hours merch, let me know. If you want to contribute financially to Working Hours, you can make a donation of any amount, and the easiest way to do that is via Ko-fi, ko-fi.com/working hours. Okay, that's me. Remember, listener, no matter what you do, it's impossible for you to understand anything that your salary depends on you not understanding. So work for peace and plan with kindness. Raise your voice and reduce your impact. Be big with your space and bigger with your dreams. Cheers, ears. Take care out there and be kind to each other, Leeds. Working Hours is produced, recorded, edited and published by Simon Treen for Western Studios, Leeds Limited. The music was The Bees from Chopin's Etudes, which is in the public domain and was taken from museopen.org. Go to western-studios.com and use the contact page on the site to drop me a message about either Working Hours or about your own Leeds podcast project. Keep up to date with Working Hours and find out about the other great Leeds podcasts that Western Studios is involved with by following Western Studios Leeds on Facebook at facebook.com/western_studios_Leeds and on LinkedIn, linkedin.com/company/Western-Studios. Western Studios Leeds is available to loaners to help them realise their own podcast projects for only £30 for an hour of audio podcast work or £40 for an hour of video podcast work. Email makemypodcast at western-studios.com with details of your project and what support you want to get your Leeds podcast made. Whatever your podcast question or need, get in touch with Western Studios Leeds.